Welcome. We are talking golf today because the second major of the men's season is upon us. We are in Philadelphia. We are just outside Philadelphia in Pennsylvania at the Aronimink Golf Club. Just the second time it's held a major. In the men's first time was 1962. Gary Player was the winner. So it's been away from Broadway for a while, and there's lots to talk about. We have Kevin van Valkenburg on the way, KVV, Director of Content at Friday Golf. So they're saying of this course, it's not a long one, but big defence is the greens. It's kind of typical parkland. We'll talk a bit about the course, I'm sure, with KVV. Often criticism of the US PGA that it lacks a certain personality. Maybe it'd be the big complaint. There are 4 Irish players there. Rory McIlroy, of course. Shane Lowry is there. Shane, obviously very disappointed with Sunday in the Masters. Since the Cognizant has probably been a bit touch disappointing, albeit played so well at the Masters for 3 days, so that's probably a bit harsh. So Shane Lowry is there. Tom McKibben is there. And as former champion Padraig Harrington will be there as well. So that's the Irish contingent. It will be on Sky Sports, who sponsor our golf coverage, the home of all 4 majors across 2026, including this week's PGA Championship. You can get Sky Sports and Sports Extra on Sky, or you can stream them with Now. So yeah, lots to talk about. We're going to do so now with Kevin van Valkenburg, Director of Content at Friday Golf. And KVV is with us. You are going to Philadelphia tomorrow. You're very welcome.
I am, yes. The brotherly love city. I'm sure they'll accept a Baltimorean like me if you're familiar with the East Coast dynamics. A little bit of a rivalry sometimes between Philly and Baltimore.
So, second major of the year. Were you ready for it? Is it you want this? You'd like a little bit more time. Where are you?
I would love to see the PGA bumped back to August. I think particularly if the PGA is going to be played in America, and I think there's a good debate to be had that it should not be played in America, that it's sought to be a worldwide major. But if they're going to, as long as they're going to keep it, the Professional Golfers Association of America is going to keep PGA in America. It really limits the venues that you can be in, particularly in May. This deal that the PGA has had with the PGA Tour to sort of wedge it in between the U.S. Open and the Masters, I think it's been detrimental to the overall event. And you just can't go very far north with some of these majors at this time of year because then you're getting into really weather difficulties. So I still don't love it in this time. It just feels like it comes so quick after the Masters. It'd be nice if we had sort of a little bit of a reset. I liked it when it was the last one of the year, but it is what it is, and for a while anyway, it's gonna stay here.
I don't know anyone who likes the more compressed format.
Yeah,
Um,
it just seems like the season comes and goes so quickly. I mean, this is the most important part of the season. Why not savor it a little bit and have it extend throughout the entire summer?
what was the impetus for the change? Can you remember?
I think that it was the Players Championship wanted to sort of have a little bit of its own spotlight because it used to be in this time period, and then it sort of moved up, and there was just a lot of horse trading going on amongst the powers that be, and I think that they thought that they were sort of an afterthought, the PGA of America, coming the very last major, and in reality that was kind of like the could be a little bit of the crescendo of the season. Basically the PGA Tour thought that the playoffs would become kind of the new big thing in August, September, and the playoffs have really been an emotional dud in their 10 plus years of existence. So, wishful thinking by the tour there, but they don't have a major in the mix of all this stuff. And what have always struggled to kind of understand is that we only truly care emotionally about the majors.
Yeah, I mean, the constant question with the USPGA is what's the identity? And it turns out the identity was it's the last major of the season. Now, that's not the sexiest identity of all time, and I'm sure they wanted a better one, but at least it was an identity. Whereas at the moment, it's just like, oh, yeah, the one in May after the Masters, and on we sort of limp. But what can you do? Because even it must be so galling for them that the Masters Champions Dinner is like the biggest thing, and then we've got a Champions Dinner. No one cares about our Champions Dinner. Has anyone ever
Nobody has a
mentioned the
chance at it.
menu at
No,
the PGA Champions Dinner ever?
no, no. You could serve hot dogs at the Champions Dinner at the PGA, and no one would really complain. No one would blast you on social media for your weird choices. It just would be like accepted as fine.
You know, so with all the other majors, there is like I guess the identity is wrapped up in the venue to some extent or other, or the characteristics of the venue. When I list out the likes of Quail Hollow and Valhalla and Oak Hill and Bethpage, the notable exception being Kiowa for me, I think for a lot of people. Well, so this is just like to a lot of people just watching at home, and maybe it's different at the venues where you've been on so many occasions. But watching from home, these venues are borderline, in the memory anyway, indistinguishable from one another. They are big, beefy US parkland courses, trees to some extent or other, bunkers to some extent or other, but they don't really kind of pop. What are they going for with the course choices, do you think?
I think that it's fair to say the number one requirement for their course choices is, do they have enough sort of area to put up all the hospitality that they want? And then that's sadly the Ryder Cup mentality too. Is that basically, hey, can we get a ton of grandstands here? Can we get a ton of corporate tents? Can we sort of bring in all the people, the sponsors that we want to wine and dine during this time? And the golf almost becomes secondary to that, and that I think is what's probably disappointing and comes throughout the competition. Is a lot of these courses that they want are, they're sort of designed around the same time. They're not really thought of as kind of some of the classic designers. Aronimink, maybe, it's a Donald Ross course originally, but Gil Hanse sort of did the makeover of it. It's just not, there's not a lot of creative, inventive thought put into it. I think a lot of us, at the Fried Egg would sort of love to see some of these courses that the US Open decided to basically discard, like Erin Hills and Chambers Bay, that those would be really interesting PGA venues, particularly if you could move them back to August. They're good courses that maybe the USGA kind of butchered in some ways, or kind of got bad break at Erin Hills because there was no wind that week. But those would be really interesting, both visually and I think strategically. Uh, but it's hard to tell like what's going on behind the scenes, whether those courses will ever get back into the rotation.
Okay. One last one on the, I guess the more recent history. The winners list is perfectly respectable, as in our defending champion is Scotty Scheffler, won with 11 under last year at Quail Hollow. The year before that, Xander Schauffele, who was, supremely brilliant in the summer of 2024. 21 under at Valhalla was not great, to be fair, but I mean, it was the drama of Bryson having to do something on the 18th. So again, you've got Scotty, Xander, Bryson, Brooks Koepka in 23 with 9 under, Justin Thomas in the playoff the year before that against Will Zalatoris, who was a real kind of major behemoth at the time, and then Phil at Kiowa in 21 is iconic. I mean, it really is one of the great, great, great majors. And then before that, Colin Morikawa 2020 at San Francisco hits that great tee shot to secure it. That was far from terrible. And then you've Brooks, and back to 2017, Justin Thomas, and then like Jimmy Walker in 16 over Jason Day in the rain in New Jersey is probably the last kind of non-elite elite. But Jimmy Walker was a very good player, and then it wasn't like who is this guy? It was far from it. But so for all the kind of bemoaning of it, they tend to find a very reasonable winner and generally an okay score. So I don't know. Maybe why can't we be happy? What's wrong with us? We're just
Yeah, I mean, I think
ingrates.
there's definitely some of that attitude of like, what do you want from
Yeah.
this? You're getting great iconic winners, people who seem like they're the most deserving. I think that the PGA in general does a pretty good job with setup, where you have to make birdies, but unless it's a toothless place like Valhalla, you're not going to shoot 20 under. I think Oak Hill was probably a good example of like a good setup for, Brooks and Victor had a really good they didn't completely separate themselves from the pack. It's possible to go out there and shoot 66, 67, but you had to really earn it and play well. And so I think that the as much as we kind of criticize PGA of America for a lot of different things, the setup committee generally finds the right medium. I think the PGA Tour's the PGA of America's identity in some ways is like, okay, the US Open is going to be an absolute grind. The Masters kind of speaks for itself. It has this kind of majestic, classiness to it. The Open Championship is quirky and shot making and sort of accepting the fates of things. And the PGA was kind of more of like, hey, this is going to be a bit of an execution test, but it's not going to be US Open light. It's going to be like, hey, put your pedal down and show off like what you can do. And so in general, I think that that's probably the right thing. It's kind of like you think about it in tennis, like every major should present a different style. It should test you a different part of your game. And so dating back to, I mean, you can even start going further back in that, Jordan Spieth won in 15 and Rory wins in 14. I mean, this is a good collection of winners. There's no like, hey man, like all of a sudden we got a Ben Curtis won the Open Championship out of the blue, this and then never did anything kind of again. So, I think the PGA of America gets credit for that.
Okay. If you're looking at the betting, Scotty is the favourite, followed by Rory. Cam Young obviously is there next, given how well he's been playing of late, and then it's John Rahm and Bryson, and on we go. It's funny on Scotty in this very bad year he's been having. He's second in the FedEx. He has one win, three consecutive runner-up finishes, and his first in strokes gained total this year. So
Yeah,
um, it's a hell of a
it's
crisis.
terrible. Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't have been. I mean, I haven't actually talked to you since the Masters. Ooh, if it had been a 5-day Masters, he was coming.
I think that if every tournament were 5 rounds, that Scotty would win 90% of the time. He
Yeah.
just is very hard to outlast over the longer the tournament gets. I think what Scotty's going through right now reminds me a little bit of the standards that Tiger went through in 2000s, particularly like the stretch from 2000 to 2006, 2007, where the expectation was, well, you're going to win a couple majors a year, right? Like there's a crisis every time you haven't won in 4 or 5 starts. And Tiger was winning at that point, like 30-40% of his starts. And so, is Scotty's iron play like a little bit, off a tick from where it was a year ago? Yes, but he's also a better putter this year than he's ever been. So I, I I would be really surprised if he wasn't in contention this week. And so we might finally get, a real clash between him and Rory, which would be great. I think Rory's really focused coming off of like a second Masters. The majors are all that matters to me at this point. And, he showed a little bit of form on Sunday at Quail. And so it's kind of a nice moment where the two of them are playing well, having just come off of playing well at the Masters. And it could make up for kind of a meh venue by being a really good showdown. And that's kind of often what we'll remember is not the course, but who was playing it.
Yeah, for sure. Um, he's such a kind of he's the most interesting, boring character of all time, Scotty Scheffler. Like even in recent weeks, he's asked about live, and he's like, I don't know, man, I just got off the golf course, and kind of spiky enough, and but then sort of laughs at the end, saves it maybe at the death, and then, even at the Masters, not I can understand maybe his irritation, but he had that amazing round and was asked like, where could it have been even better because he had so many chances, and he was like, awful question, awful. Next question. So I don't know. Your read on where he is struggling with his game, like emotionally as a person.
Yeah, I think he's just he's a little bit frustrated. I think that he cannot put 4 really great rounds together. That there's these little bit of for a while it was like early starts that he would just get off to kind of a bad start. He's such a competitive psycho. He kind of hides it well, but he is a like Michael Jordan type lunatic when it comes to wanting to compete and wanting to beat you. And yet he's also like a pretty polite person, and so those two things are in conflict when he sits down in front of the media. And I think that there's a part of him that wants to sort of say, like, do you realize like how easy this is for me and how like hard it is for everyone else? Like you don't get that? Like what are you watching? I'm the only person for whom these standards apply to about like, oh, you shot 65, why wasn't it better?
Yeah.
And so I think when you're that talented, there are times when like it's really he's frustrated with himself, and so he's kind of like snapping back at, he can't be angry with himself, as much as he can sort of be angry at the premise of the question. He's trying to sort of balance this idea of like, I did a really great job, while at the same time I'm steaming because I know that it probably wasn't good enough to put me in a position to win.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, like when players get snippy with the media, it's fine. Like I actually think it shows a little bit of personality. Some people take it personally. I never do, because I sort of grasp that it's just kind of they're fresh out of the fire of competition, and of course they're going to be a little bit salty. It's more when they're like a jerk away from the sort of heat of competition stuff that I think, well, that's kind of a reflection of actual your character. And I think that there are ways that media people could ask a little bit better questions that could illuminate better answers that don't set up a premise to be agreed with. Be like, boy, that was a tough round out there when we just shot 67. And what went wrong? Well, it's a better question might be just like, what are your thoughts on what happened today?
Yeah.
And then just leave it be. And, but that's something that journalists could probably do a little bit better sometimes to give them the opportunity to present what are your feelings, as opposed to, aren't these your feelings? Why don't you agree with them?
Yeah. Open question when they're cooking off a course. I got strong Matt Damon, Good Will Hunting vibes there when you were doing. Don't you know how easy this is for me? Have you any idea?
I didn't want to drop the F-bomb there that's in that part of the clip, but yeah.
So I guess if we do get a Scotty Rory rivalry, that would be, as you said, tournament saving in a very big way for the PGA of America. Rory was at Quail Hollow post Masters. He has just turned 37, and in advance of Quail Hollow, he said, "I feel like if anything, I'm more motivated after what happened at Augusta this year than I've ever been." Didn't play great on Saturday, shot 75. And on Sunday, had a 67 to kind of grab a backdoor top 20 finish. And he said of what happened across the week, I got into a few bad habits just because of that left to right wind on the range all week. So I straightened that out on Saturday. I'll go home tonight, which will be nice, spend the night in my own bed and practice at home tomorrow. The swing aficionados said the left to right wind on the range all weekend. He developed a slide over the top motion in his swing, slightly shut club face, which led to some pulled iron shots throughout the week, which is all very well. Although he pulled a few at the Masters. I mean, I didn't want to point that out and get told off. Sure. But again, another actual aspect of the move to May is the Masters champion, bar I think Dustin Johnson was the one. But the Masters, and obviously that was the autumnal Masters. The Masters champion has never fared well at the USPGA in May since the move.
Yeah, just probably an emotional thing to unpack, winning a Masters, right? Life-changing thing to get back up and ready to play in a major so quickly is probably a difficult task. And, it's for historically, like having that time to reset before the US Open was probably a lot better for the Masters champion, but we'll see. I mean, I think Rory, having won back-to-back Masters now, that he knows kind of what went wrong last year, I think, after post Masters, and how he kind of lost focus a little bit and let sort of 11, 12 years of disappointments kind of wash off of him. I don't think that's going to happen this year.
Yeah. He was asked about his preparation for the USPGA, and he said initially with a straight face, yeah, I lived up there for a week. And then said, no, I just flew up once. But,
It's funny that he is like that engaged with, golf Twitter or whatever, that he's willing to kind of poke fun at the stupidity of the argument that was being floated around, that he had somehow an unfair advantage.
I swear to God, Stephen A. Smith, he's just suddenly looked around somewhere. Skip, let's get on the case.
I'm not one of these people who's a gatekeeper that feel like non-golf people shouldn't talk about golf, but that's a good example of like, hey, maybe educate yourself before you go on to
I don't know.
speak in front of millions of people about something.
Asterisks
Uh,
beside it, I mean, he cheated his way to the Masters. Um, you sat down with him for a great interview on behalf of the Fried Egg with Rory in advance of the Masters. And it was so interesting on lots of things. Like the line which stuck with me as a kind of oh, I never thought about him that way. That kind of explains a lot. Was when he likened himself to his father's personality, that he's just a natural optimist. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Of that, the last 15 years had a very different tilt to them. Suddenly, I thought that really tallied. And I don't know why I didn't consider Rory a natural optimist all these years, because he is a kind of bouncy, cheerful guy. But yeah, it was really interesting. What did you take away from the chat with him?
yeah, I think hopefully it was sort of a kind of an example of like how you build a rapport with someone over time, and then they're comfortable, thinking about big themes with you. I mean, he and I have known each other now for 7, 8 years of of trust. He doesn't think that I'm out to sort of like burn him somehow, and so when I
It's going to be so
ask a
sweet when you do,
question.
though, isn't it? When you just in the next year or two when you do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think he knows that I approach things sort of from a fair perspective, and
Yeah.
we both have daughters, and so we've talked about that over time. And I think just opening up about those kind of big picture themes was a good opportunity to maybe show some side of him that's we're talking about things that are bigger than golf, and that's the kind of stuff that has always interested me as a journalist anyway. And yeah, I enjoy one of my least favorite things in interviewing is when people ask questions where they're kind of long, rambling questions that are meant to get you to sort of agree with the premise, and or to sort of reveal, hey, you're such a smart questioner. And so, part of this is like what they teach you at ESPN or what they teach you in journalism school growing up is I have learned to ask questions that are just kind of short, open questions, and you have to kind of let the silence do some work for you in between things. And so I hope anybody who like watched that interview can sort of see that is that a simple question of like, well, what do you mean by that? Well,
Mm.
why do you think you're like your dad? And he is the kind of athlete who will then expound upon that and give really good, thoughtful answers. And so that was, I think, a good example of just hopefully two people who are pretty good at their professions and getting to sort of get something out of it that you wouldn't get otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. And did anything that he said register with you in particular?
Um, I think one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting was when we talked about having dinner with Roger Federer, and I asked, do you ever find yourself that it's a little bit surreal to sit at those tables, be like, oh my God, I'm sitting with Roger Federer, and he admitted that, yeah, like I do sometimes, and I think that that's an interesting insight into Rory's world is that he knows on an intellectual level that he is, maybe the greatest European golfer of all time, and that he is, among the six people who've won the career Grand Slam. But he's also self-aware enough to think, like, I'm still in the way that I view myself sometimes a kid from Hollywood, Northern Ireland, and I don't think of myself as like on par with like some of the all-time greats. He's a soccer person, so like George Best was one of his idols and whatnot, and so think about like that of like, whoa, I'm one of those people. Like I dreamed of that, but I actually it's surreal for me to say it and to think about it and to be in this holy air with Roger Federer talking about motivation and greatness and where you go from here.
Yeah. Well, on that point, fascinating to see if we get the Scotty Rory thing happening this year, how he sees himself. Like I always think back to Royal Portrush last year, where he was being interviewed on Sky TV as Scotty was, Rory had finished his round on the Sunday, and Scotty was in the midst of the coronation on the back nine, and McIlroy called Scotty inevitable. He said Scotty's just inevitable at the moment, when he's like this. Um, so I wonder, that when Rory's at his best, when Scotty's at his best, ideally, hopefully that happens this summer. Um, how each responds to that moment is going to be fascinating. I mean, I guess they both have to be at their best first. Scotty needs to start well, which he hasn't been doing of late, and you forget Rory won the Masters with a kind of sorcery, from the trees. Like we'll be watching both very closely. I think front nine more so than other majors.
Yeah, I think their skill sets are a little different, right? Rory's an incredible driver and a very hot, streaky player, and Scotty is someone who is the smartest, most disciplined golfer. Some people would argue like ever. He gets as much satisfaction out of hitting it to 30 feet than he would if he pulled an iron and hit it to a foot. He's almost kind of annoyed at that because he knows that, I would rather have the discipline to do the right play than to do the lucky play. And they faced off at the Ryder Cup, but it wasn't a particularly great match. They were both kind of exhausted,
Mm.
and so I think the two of them are both competitive enough that they would enjoy, I think, kind of facing off in some ways. And in a way, that would probably be better for Rory than like taking a 6-stroke lead into the last round, because Rory's at his best when he is forced to really lock in with someone who is also playing great, and just it's almost kind of Rory's like, I watch me do this. Like I watch me hit this incredible iron shot into 12 at Augusta. Watch me sort of rope one around the corner here. And, you know, I think that playing with Scotty would sort of raise the bar for him, as opposed to like, oh man, can I hang on to this? Maybe I'll just start playing safe again. Like I'll aim for the middle of greens. Rory almost kind of needs someone to narrow his focus in that way, and I think Scotty would do that.
Yeah, for sure. Curious for your thoughts on that Masters win last month. Um, and this is the premise, which you can agree or disagree with. It was amazing, not least given the drama. I mean, it was a very dramatic win in the end. But once he got onto the 18th green eventually safely, it was kind of striking how businesslike it felt in comparison with 2025. Yes, like the fallout, the walk from the 18 to the clubhouse, and we all understand why. First, after the famine versus two in a row. But even other players and the emotion and the hugs, like Shane Lowry was understandably more disappointed for himself, whereas first year's huge bear hug, it's everyone. It really did feel like a kind of a quick stamp done next major kind of a moment, like more so than I almost thought it would.
Yeah, it reminded me a little bit of when he won at Valhalla in 2014. It was like, yeah, I kind of expected this. Like I'm going to win like 10 or 12 of these. Like why would I get too excited about this? Like I'm excited, but then I'm just moving on to the next thing. And maybe that's the new reality for him. It's like, hey, if he wins this one, it's going to be like, yeah, I kind of expected that. This is
Mm.
the person that I thought I would be for 10 years. And now I am that person again. So, I think that Masters was really interesting in part, and I wrote this a little bit that Sunday night, is that it just kind of really showed his evolution as a golfer of like, hey, when I don't have my A game, I'm not going to just sort of like sulk and keep like pressing through and trying to figure it out. I'm going to kind of maneuver my way around. I'm going to think my way through. I'm going to use all the tools of discipline and strategy and intelligence that I've gained over the years and win in a different way. And I think that that's a testament to his growth and maturity as an athlete of like, I don't have to do this perfect the way that I did when I dominated a Kiowa, or the way that I did when I dominated a congressional. I can win in different ways. I can use my short game. I mean, I think some of what he did during that Saturday round, when he was totally off and lost, but kept scraping it around and kept sort of, giving himself that chance still to be in that final group, was really what won that Masters in a way. Yes, he came back on the Sunday after Cam kind of pulled ahead briefly, but the up and down that he made on 6 from way left down, it's 30 feet below the surface, and he hit an unbelievable uh, pitch there that then he made the putt. That was remarkable, the way that he did not let that stuff kind of get away from him. And I think that that's a testament to yeah, we're entering an era where he's got probably 4 or 5 years of, hey, I have to make my case for history right now. Like I already know some of it is secure, but everything now is just like how much further up the historical ladder can I get? And I think, you know, is 9 majors in play? Like is double digit majors in play? It's hard to win majors, so probably not, but it's hard to say that he won't do it too, because if that's the person who can play in majors when he's off a little bit and he can still put himself in contention, then yeah, there's a real chance.
Yeah, it was. He was tongue in cheek when he said it, but I thought, no, no, it's true. When he was asked, like, we've never seen you play like this in a major before, and he was like, I guess I've become a wildly old veteran. I was like, God, he has though. It's funny. So we sort of went big there on Scotty Rory as the big two, whereas coming into Augusta, it was, oh no, it's the big four with John Rahm and Bryson. Um, so I don't know. Is there going to be a live sting in the tail here from the two boys?
I would sure like to see John play better. I picked him to win the Masters before the Masters, so I'm not one of these people who felt coming in like, oh man, there's Liv is just such a terrible prep for these guys. I thought, hey, he's played really well there. Like he deserves to be in this conversation. And now I'm kind of like feeling like, man, is it just a little bit of a mental burden of like he knows deep down that this is not the best plan of prep for majors, that playing in this, Trump course in Virginia, that's probably not the best time that would suit him for getting ready to play in the PGA, that going to South Africa is probably not great Masters prep. John is just, he's so talented and was so good at kind of playing this aggressive, angry, disciplined golf that was kind of, I have something to prove. We know that he feels like he was annoyed constantly that everyone was like, Rory this, Rory that, Rory this. And that's some of what kind of drove him leaving the PGA Tour, was like, I can show that I'm the straw that stirs the drink and I'll be the one to unite these tours. And everyone will think of me as kind of this, Pied Piper type figure that brings everything together. And it hasn't worked out that way. And I think it's golf is so mental that it is impossible to not look at it and think like, is this the difference between Rahm of old and Rahm in the present moment? He's good enough to where he could just lock in and play great at the PGA Championship. But every major that comes and goes, where he's not in contention, where he's not kind of back to his old self, I think that mental burden grows larger. And you could see some of that in his comments this week prior to the the live event in Virginia, where he is essentially saying, well, my contract is pretty ironclad, so there's no way to get out of it. The lawyers did a pretty good job so I'm here. That's not exactly like a ringing endorsement of like, yeah, I have no interest in returning to the PGA Tour. That's like, hey guys, I'm stuck here and I can't do anything about it. I've made that decision, so I just have to kind of grin and bear it until Live either thrives or no longer exists. And I think that that's a little bit telling into someone's psyche of like, hey, this could be a better situation for me, but unfortunately I made the decision that I did, and so now I'm kind of stuck here.
Yeah.
I just wonder with John, and if I were ever to kind of get to interview him and ask him, he used to always say that I have plenty of money. I don't need that. I'm interested in history. I would sort of, want to ask him what did this financial windfall, how did it affect your life in a positive way? And do you feel like it was worth whatever it detracted you? Because he might say like, yeah, I know now that like 6 generations of Roms will be financially secure, and that's a bigger legacy that I could leave in golf. But if he was so adamant about like, I have more money than I can ever spend in my lifetime, uh, I would like to know, how did getting that windfall affect him, and just sort of see how he would turn the question over in his head.
Yeah. Because when he gave that answer about how you could offer me 300-400 million, it wouldn't change my day to day life in the slightest. There was such wisdom in it for a young man, and
Yeah.
it was so cogently delivered, and you could tell he'd had this thought many times before. That yes, it does beg the question. You know, why did you do it? And I know because somebody was in touch with me to say that well, he was positive about live elsewhere, and the line about the lawyers and the contract kind of made the headlines. But I did see the clip, and I think even if your mind goes there, even slightly in jest, I do think it's telling. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, he is an interesting case. Bryson, on the other
There's this,
hand, yes, sorry, go on.
there's just kind of a probably apocryphal story, but it's about Joseph Heller and Kurt Vonnegut, two authors. Sort of, they were at a party in the Hamptons. This is like enormous house, like an enormous house, and Vonnegut said to Heller, allegedly, can you imagine like having a house like this? And Heller supposedly said, yeah, but I have something that this person will never have. And Vonnegut was like, well, what is that? And Heller said, enough. I know that I have enough. And that I think is like a telling story. Is like people like Scotty, people like Rory kind of probably looked at their financial situation as like, what more could I actually have and want? Like if you just are content with having 500 million, but you don't necessarily need to be a billionaire, it's able to kind of guide your life in, I think, an interesting, probably positive way.
And not to get into it all again, because it's all 3, 4 years ago, and it's probably irrelevant in some respects. But from memory, there were definitely moments where Ram was, it felt like in press conferences, a little irritated at feeling a bit on the outside of the PGA Tour response to Live.
Sure.
And there was, I vividly remember there was like one big meeting, the media maybe played it up, but it was like crucial meeting that morning. And Ram was asked about it, and he was like, I was in my hotel playing with my daughter. I didn't go to the meeting. And I'm not sure he might be too proud to say it, but I did think he wanted to feel the love and a bit more of an arm around the
Yes,
shoulder. And John, what do you think about the direction of the tour? And
for sure.
and that didn't seem to happen to him.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I can tell you very specifically, like when I kind of clicked for me that he felt this way. It was in Italy, the Ryder Cup press conference, and all the media is asking all these questions of Justin Rose and Rory and Tyrrell and all these people, and John Rahm, the number one player in the world at the time, hadn't gotten a single question asked of him. And I sort of asked, I was writing a piece about why Europe cares so much about the Ryder Cup. And I said, Justin and John, could you please like speak to this idea of what does it mean to be a European Ryder Cupper? And John was like, oh, somebody has a question for me? Wow, okay. And Rory kind of laughed and tried to kind of like diffuse some of the tension, be like, yeah, yeah, come on, like let's ask some more questions to John, like number one player in the world. And you could tell that he was like, okay, finally somebody's asking me a question. Like he feels, and I think at the time had certainly earned that right to sort of be this voice within the game. But because Rory is such a magnetic character and gives such good answers and is willing to sort of reveal vulnerabilities and stuff, that oftentimes the attention would always kind of go to him in those settings, whether it was we're talking about Live or we're talking about the future PGA Tour, or we're talking about what it means to be a Ryder Cupper. And I know that bugged John a little
Yeah,
bit, that he
yeah.
felt like, man, what aren't I like on this same plane? I've won majors more recently than Rory. Like, why don't you guys want to ask my opinion on that? And I think that can speak to a little bit of like what drove him to say like, all right, you don't need me, then I don't need you
Yeah,
guys.
that's interesting. Yeah, because anytime I've seen him at open press conferences, I mean, he loves holding court on the game and
Hmm.
like the open challenge and courses and links golf, and he likes giving opinions, likes being asked his opinions. But hey, you know what? We'll Monday morning quarter this back when he wins, and we'll say, "See all this anger. This is why he won." He shoved it up into everyone's face.
We
Um,
mortals can just
yeah,
decide the gods what their motivation was after the fact, always
yeah,
with the results
exactly.
in the review.
Exactly. Bryson, meanwhile, is so interesting. Like I mean, he's always pretty interesting. He is a free agent at the end of this season, and what he said about a return to the PGA Tour, and it turned out some of his representatives at the Masters were having conversations with PGA Tour officials. Nothing concrete, but just what are the potential pathways. But he said something so interesting, like in the context of a guy who was, and I don't use the word lightly. I think you could say borderline bullied by Brooks Koepka on the tour for a period.
Sure.
He said on coming back to the PGA Tour potentially. It's really about if the membership wants me back, not Brian Rowlap or a top executive. It's about if the players want me back, and if not, I understand. Does he want the answer to that question?
I don't know that he does. I think talking to players in private, and I think that they would be fine if I shared this sentiment. Like, he's not particularly well liked. They think he's just sort of like that annoying kid in class who always has the answers, and sometimes the answers are the wrong answers, but he's extremely confident in the answer. And I don't know that. If Dustin Johnson wanted to come back, I think the membership would be like, yeah, that's fine. Like, he didn't sue the tour, he resigned his membership. Uh, with Bryson, and there's a little bit of this with Rahm. There's like this idea of like, well, I want to have it both ways. Like, I think I should still be able to make this huge sum of money, but then also be on the PGA Tour with Bryson. There's this idea that like, well, I'm too important for you to let me go. And I think the answer to that would be like, really? Because we're doing just fine. We don't need you to be a part of this. Like, you may think that you would bring this massive influx of viewership, but if that were true, why aren't they showing up and watching live? And I think there would be an initial kind of buzz if Bryson were to return. There would be, all the fans that he has picked up. If you talk to people who've gone to live events, uh, there is a palpable sort of crowd following him. There is a people that's probably the biggest interest of people who go to live events is like, I really want to see Bryson. So I think there is some validity to that. And you can look at some of the online stuff and say, well, this is a positive development for the future of the game. If he is really getting more kids into it, the golf has always had sort of an old fan base, right? So you can't just forever assume that the membership numbers will stay the same if you don't grow the pyramid at the bottom. And I don't know what Bryson would do as a member of the PGA Tour. Like, would he be willing to kind of abide by some of the collective bargaining essentially that or would he be that to try to be his own individual? Part of the thing with his YouTube channel is that he's the main character all the time, and Bryson likes being the main character. If you're on the PGA Tour, it's harder to be the main character. And if you're constantly trying to be a content creator in other areas, like, is that benefiting you or is it benefiting the PGA Tour? And I think Brian Rowlap, who comes from a world of the NFL where like, hey, the NFL is the star. It's not, Patrick Mahomes is the star, Lamar Jackson is the star. I don't know that it is going to be an easy folding in of Bryson and all of his eccentricities as everyone would like it to be.
Yeah, he was in the same breath expressing some worries that if he wants to make content on a side at a PGA Tour event, then he thinks that's a violation, and that seems to be a bit of a bottom line for him too. So, yeah, I guess we'll see on the live thing, because this is all kind of broken again since we last spoke. As a final thought, the Saudis, for a variety of reasons, are more focused now on profit and value for money, and Liv really represented none of those things. So they're pulling out, and I guess what happens to Liv is a huge, huge question. There was a great piece on The Athletic where a lot of work done. I'd recommend it, but some where people in the know of this world were asked for their thoughts on it, and so to give you an example, there was one investor who currently holds a stake in an F1 team but didn't want to give their name, but understands the dynamic of teams in sport. And he or she said, Liv is so far from cash flow break even. The math is just never going to work. The business model was around selling these franchises to get all of that money out. But that investment thesis has completely failed. The teams are simply not recognizable entities. The Crushers are the Crushers because of Bryson DeChambeau. When he's not there, who the F wants the Crushers? And I think that's true. That in all of the kind of prophecies made by live people, like that the teams would somehow be worth anything, is just been a disaster. And so they reckoned in the piece, it said Liv is targeting team valuations of $300 million for equity sales, but one prominent investor with first-hand experience in selling team franchises and who has insight into Liv negotiations said, I can't imagine those teams are worth more than $30 million, and yet Liv are looking for $300 million. And to give a comparison, if we take TGL, this indoor simulator league with teams of PGA Tour players, I mean, I don't think that's been a success, but the first six teams were sold for $35 million in 23. And there is an expansion franchise now being added, and that's being valued, if you want to buy that, at double the 35 million, so kind of $70 million. One of the more popular teams is kind of valuing itself at 100 million. So the notion that like the Crushers are worth 300 million or ever will be is completely fanciful. So I don't know. Look, the piece said, look, you could sell this. You'll get someone will come in for a pennies on the dollar price and you might buy it. But like purses slashed, the tour, like a shadow of itself. I don't know. I mean, you think John Rahm is having buyer's remorse now? I mean, give that a year, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the most important lesson in economics is things are only worth what someone will pay for them. And it's a simple sort of thing to say, but it is absolutely the bottom line truth. Who is going to be the first person, the investor out there, to be like, all right, I'll buy the Crushers. I'll spend $300 million. Well, it's only worth $300 million in that sense if then you get 10 more people to put up $300 million. And it's just part of the problem in the function of live is that these teams within the league have never actually functioned like actual teams. Like you can't make a trade with another team that benefits you that might fleece another team. It's just like, all right, well, this player is unhappy here, so let's shuffle some things around and like for the good of the league, these teams will have to sort of eat Matthew Wolf's contract or whatever. And it doesn't even come out of that team's salary cap. I mean, there's no scenario where like Liverpool is like, all right, well, let's help out Man U or the Arsenal or whatever. And
We're all
so,
in this together, guys.
yeah, exactly. So it's just a bizarre business model. And so for some of these guys to come out this week and be like, oh, I'd rather retire than go play. That I'm so happy with Live. Yeah, of course you are, because you're being paid in a way that doesn't actually justify your value in any way. Like Anirban Lahiri talking about, oh, it's a joke that we'd want to come back. Like the idea that the PGA Tour would want Anirban Lahiri back is kind of laughable. Like you'd made zero difference to the bottom line over here. You have completely like overestimated your value based on irrational actor within the market who never had to sort of turn a profit one way or another. And was there a scenario where if Scotty and Rory had decided they wanted to have live teams and they were going to get $500 million for it, that this might have worked? Even then, I don't know like how you ever sustain that without a bottomless investment that goes from $6 billion to one day $20 billion. And it's like, well, we're still lighting money on fire with the hope that this is gonna turn around someday. I don't know. Like I just, it never made sense to me. And I haven't gotten everything right in the live sort of discussion, but the one thing I sort of said from the beginning is you are always subject to the changing winds of what goes on in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And some, you know, a dictator, a despot like MBS or whatever is going to say, yeah, I don't have any interest in that anymore. And then it's just gone, or Yasser falls out of favor and it's like, yep, we're done with this. That has always been the light switch that can just flick off in the way that it doesn't work for other professional sports leagues. And that's essentially what happened.
I'm sure you talk to people in the game, like Paul McGinley, for instance, and he's been on DP World Tour boards and sees it from the media side and former player, and has a pretty good, I think, 360 view. And he's strongly of the opinion that the game is in for a reckoning. He means the PGA Tour, he means the DP World Tour, whatever becomes a LIV. He said, this has all left the game in a very difficult and unsustainable place. The overheads, the prize funds, they're now so huge because of LIV. Everybody loses, except the players. The tours lose, they've got huge overheads. Public lose, they're seen as a diluted product. They're having to pay more to go into events. And so he is saying there's a reckoning coming. And I saw the chief executive of the R&A, Mark Darbin, as well. He was warning just the other week about prize money being unsustainable. We've seen a bit of restructuring of the PGA Tour, a few job losses. I don't know how connected they are, but like this kind of splurge to fight off LIV. Are people in the game saying that like things are going to have to change here? These signature events and all the money, like okay, we were fighting a war, it was a war effort, but now like the PGA Tour is headed for a reckoning, or not so much. They're okay.
I think the biggest thing that will kind of determine what kind of reckoning are going to happen is how much TV money, streaming money is going to continue to be out there when the PGA Tour renegotiates like its next sort of contract extension. If the broadcast networks are going to say like, all right, you know, we still think golf is like a huge winning market for us, like the demographic of, you know, adult males 29 to 60 making X amount of dollars, like that's a winning thing for us that we can sell ads for. And so we are going to continue to pump billions of dollars into that.
Yeah.
I think the reckoning could be less than what people think if that metric holds up. If it doesn't, if the NFL, which is the sort of, you know, 300-pound elephant in the room, is just being willing to say, we want all the money when it comes to streaming rights. We are going to just dominate sports in general entirely, not only in the United States, but perhaps like globally, where they continue to kind of dip their toe into, we're going to play a game in Brazil, we're going to play a game in Australia, we're going to play games throughout Europe. Like if the NFL is ever to kind of go worldwide and sort of eat up that percentage of the market too, I think there is sort of a real reckoning for golf. I mean, what the LIV stuff did was convince golfers that their worth is really more than what the market will
Yeah.
tolerate.
Yeah.
And you could say Phil Mickelson was his biggest beef was always like, we get a smaller percentage of the revenue that is generated than any other sport. And there is some truth to that. Now, there was this whole charitable element within golf that didn't sort of have to exist within other sports because it was run as a nonprofit. But Phil Mickelson didn't deserve $200 million based on what the market would bear, right? There's a time when Tiger Woods did, but Phil Mickelson at age 52, whatever it was when he left, did not deserve that. But because the Saudis were willing to pay it, it made all these people throughout the game think, well, I'm worth that much money too. So you have this completely like irrational actor within the game driving prices up to where they're totally unsustainable. And I do think that that is going to collapse at some point when, in part, when LIV goes away and it's all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, every professional golfer should thank LIV for this. Well, that might be true for in the immediate moment of like, yes, Rory's gotten a lot richer, Scotty's gotten a lot richer, but what wreckage will be left after that sort of goes away when it's, you know, a lot of tournaments have to be eliminated, prizes have to be shrunk into a smaller pool. Like, I think there's a real danger that if this, we could have done serious long-term damage to the game because people like Phil Mickelson, people like, you know, Brooks, Bryson in that moment were like, I deserve more than what the market will bear. And I've found a sucker to be willing to sort of put that money up.
Yeah, very interesting. I saw the TV audience in the US, biggest TV audience for a final round of a PGA tournament last year was about 4 million. NFL game will knock out kind of 19 million average regular season game, you know. But the last TV deal was really good, I think, in US golf. It was like 6 billion or something. They kind of got in before all this stuff was diluted. It's a slightly different product now. So,
and Tiger was part of those negotiations, which he will not be going forward. There's no rational person, TV executive, who can think like, oh, the Tiger bump will be part of this next thing. Like Tiger, not only is he not a competitive player anymore, but he's no longer really even like a ceremonial golfer. And there's a considerable and justified backlash because of some of his personal life decisions that are going to cost the PGA Tour probably at least $1 billion in whatever negotiation they're going to do, because he's not even evolved to slap it around and be like the Arnold Palmer figure, who was there just for sort of, the sentiment of it.
Yeah. Okay, listen, fascinating as always. Do you want to give a shot to nothing? Nobody will remember this if you lose, but everyone will remember it when we play it back when you win. My tip for the US PGA.
So this will seem less kind of like stick my neck out there than it did 24 hours ago or 36 hours ago. But I think Ricky Fowler, this might be like his best chance to win a major and to sort of put a cap on his career. I've been kind of monitoring that he's been playing progressively better, and then he got in contention at the Truist. And I said, we reported a podcast that Sunday morning where I was like, watch out for Ricky. I think Ricky could be a factor next week. And then he went out and shot 65 on Sunday and was in it, and had the lead through, I think, the 16th, 17th hole. I don't think Ricky's going to win the PGA, but if he did, I want credit for having called it early.
Done. He'd be a popular winner. I'd have no problems with that at all, Ricky Fowler. Listen, Kevin, that was so good. Thank you so much.
Anytime.